virtualization. And because they were financial services, they had to have a disaster recovery site because of, I mean, it's people's money. And the way that they did a disaster recovery site is when he went to go build a server, then he would go build another server, and he would drive the other server over to the other data center. And if he had to make a change on the first one, he would have to drive over to the other data center and make a change on the second one. Really not cost effective as a disaster recovery scenario. Now with virtualization, however, I have the ability to encapsulate all the configurations that is a virtual machine down to just one single file. Right? A virtual disk is a virtual disk, and it's one file large. So with that virtual disk in my hands, I can then replicate the contents of that virtual disk from one place to another, and so it creates this really cost-effective sense of disaster recovery. It's not, I don't know, it's not hard to do disaster recovery again. I mean, it's still challenging, but the whole driving servers around problem just really isn't there anymore. So disaster recovery, much, much easier in virtualization because, well, we've now got the automation functions that distill all the way down even to SMB. I mean, even SMBs can do disaster recovery these days with virtualization very, very, very easily. And lastly, is really helping you come to grips with this impending notion of cloud computing. Right now, today, at the end of 2011, beginning of 2012, there are a lot of people still afraid of cloud computing, and it's understandable. It's a very, shattering, it's a very disruptive technology. A lot of people wondering where it fits. And whereas virtualization and cloud computing are by no means the same thing, the embrace of one begins to lead one into the embrace of the other. So becoming familiar with vSphere is a good educational point for your resume, for your taking the test, for your just the wisdom that you can apply to your entire, to the contribution that you provide for your company. And that's a good thing. Becoming more valuable to your company is really important, and so there's no better way to do it these days, it seems, than by becoming really, really familiar with virtualizations, and especially advanced virtualizations topics. Now, before we even get started, right, before you actually even start watching, working with me in these videos and learning together with me, there are a couple things you have to know, and luckily they're not that bad. Couple of prerequisites for this series. Number one is just an understanding of the Windows OS. If you've been working with the Windows OS for really any period of time, you are familiar with it, great. Also, no fear of Linux. Whereas in vSphere version 4 and 4.1, and particularly now in vSphere version 5, the number of things that you have to do that make you resort back to the old Linux OS stuff, in the Linux UI, which is command line, getting less and less. In fact, in version 5, there is no ESX anymore. There's only ESXi, and ESXi is a very, 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 very stripped down, almost appliance-like version of Linux. Some people don't like it when you call ESXi Linux, but it still runs off of it has a management partition there that runs off of a highly tailored version of BusyBox Linux. You can drill into that Linux if you want, and you can play around with that Linux, but I will tell you that in this series, I'm actually going to spend almost no time in the Linux UI. But having no fear of it, at least having some comfort level with it, will assist. There are some commands that you probably should at least be aware of. If you're going to take the exam, it is commonly asked for you to understand what the Linux commands are. But just having no fear of the Linux OS, even if you don't have experience, just no fear is important.